in English, forum name Hyperbyte, and in this module we'll be looking at using the Wappler Database Manager. There's been a little bit of a resurgence in interest in this recently, and there's also been a lot of confusion with some new users as to exactly how that works. And to date, really, the only real reference we had was the 2020 webinar video, which George very kindly took part in to demonstrate the very, very early version of the Database Manager. So as a consequence, he approached me the other day and said, could you do an update? So here it is. So we're going to be looking at the Database Manager. Where does this sit? I'm just going to show you a current playlist within the YouTube Wappler channel. Various videos I've done. We start with, I've got a simple PowerPoint presentation really on what relational database theory is all about. I go through how to create connections, both via Server Connect and the Database Manager, which should help you through to getting to this video. I also show you how to use environment variables to define database connections. And then naturally in that flow is obviously how to use that Database Manager. But to say at the moment that's very out of date. And then for those of you who have managed to get through that many videos of mine, you can then look at the more sophisticated videos on joins, subtables and multi-references. And then finally I have a module available on inner left and right joins to show you not just how to find data, but actually how to use joins to find data which is missing as well. So this is a remake of the Wappler Database Manager demo, which was demoed in 2020, and I won't be covering how to create connections. I'm going to assume that you've already done that and move straight into how it runs. For those of you interested in the background, the whole Database Manager stroke everything really about databases in Wappler at the moment is based around a system called Connex. Connex is superbly documented, I might add, and if anybody wants to write their own custom extensions, etc., I would recommend, if it involves using databases, they make themselves familiar with Connex, because that will be necessary to be able to access the various actions that you would need to undertake. Lastly, I'm just going to very quickly remind you how database connections work in Wappler. So if we start, we have Wappler down here, we have a web server, we have a database server. And if we look at the workflows section, globals, database definition, that works in a slightly different way to our Database Manager, with the caveat that Docker actually does things completely differently again. So normally with Wappler, you'll have a connection script that uploads a file to the web server will then send a query to the database will then return the data to your web server, which in turn is returned to our application, our web app, as a JSON response. And that's the process that you will use within the workflows. But the Database Manager is a little different, as a caveat, totally different in Docker. Database Manager makes a direct connection to your database server, bypassing the web server, and that has certain implications, obviously, because you also have to manage the additional security that a lot of servers have to prevent hackers doing that. Docker does things completely differently. Yes, it does in the background, but really practically it's not important, other than using a general connection script to the database. Docker actually performs an SSH tunnel to that database. So it's a different technology in the background, but the reality is that once it's up and running, the difference is fairly insignificant. So If I go back to the intro there, I'll now move on to the next stage where we'll have a look at the database manager itself. So here we see I'm back into Wappler, and I'm just going to quickly show you the two target environments that we're working with. I have a development target that's just running a SQLite database, and we can look at that database connection and see that's exactly what we have there, and test. You can see that we have that database connection okay. We also have a development, or a production I should say, environment, and within that we can see that we have our settings to connect to our production DB, and again you can show that we can connect that. So that's the environment we'll be running this demo on, and within this I'll be showing you how to use various features and explain what those various features mean. A look at the initial interface for the database manager. You'll see we have our database connection set up, and you can see here first of all you have some properties in relation to that database connection. You have convention, that's to do with how the automatically produced names appear, so you can choose between Snake case and Pascal case. I tend to just leave that default, but quite a significant one is the primary key type, and you can choose default, which is increment, big increments. So if you've got a really massive databases, you might want that to be big int rather than int. And you also have the choice to be able to use UUID as an alternative to the primary key. So that of course will be non-sequential, random string that in theory cannot be duplicated as your unique identifier. If any of you don't know what a UUID looks like, if I just run that just returns a UUID there. So it's a big long random string that's generated from the server level as a unique identifier. So of course that would be non-sequential, but still remains unique, which is the important thing. We then have our tables list. In this case we have no tables or views defined at this stage. We have a change log, so we can see that which changes have been made. As we make them, they are stored in the change history. And seeds, again we were dealing with seeds at the end of this video. So I think what we need to do now is look at creating a few tables and just seeing the various options we have to be able to do that. Let's now have a look at the database manager, and let's make a table. So at the moment we have no tables shown. What we need to do is just to right click and create a new table. And what I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to create a users table, typically that we would use for authentication purposes. We see an ID field is immediately created automatically by Wappler, and we can see then that there are some properties there. Now this is the one and only chance you will get to change the name of that unique identifier. After that, Wappler will not allow you to do that, and that's sensible because you can really break relationships between tables by changing primary key names. So it's quite sensible that it does that, but I don't like to leave everything just as as ID, because it gets really confusing. So I tend to prefix the ID with the table name. So type is an increment, and that's basically an auto increment field. And we have some properties down here now, UI properties. If you've watched the 2020 gathering video, then you will have seen George talking about in the future being able to produce to generate forms and tables directly from the database, and also possibly those CRUD server actions automatically. And this part is in preparation for that. It's still not live. We don't know how far away that is. I have checked with George, and it's still in the melting pot, as it were. Will come eventually, but there we will be able to give some details of the the sort of UI properties, the label and the help, etc., and the type of input, and you can see all the different types of input there. But for the moment, that's not live. And obviously you can also make a comment in there, so if you want to add a comment to clarify what that particular field is for, then feel free to do that there. I need also to mention the advanced tab, because this is a basic tab. If you hit advanced, for this particular field it doesn't make any difference at all, but for some of the later ones we look at, that will add some additional options to the interface so that you can be more precise in what you want. So we're going to use a table. It would only make sense that perhaps we have a username or an email field. So I'll create that. That's a string. For string, and generally read varchar. In other words, a character string up to 255 characters. But the database manager will manage the size of that string. So if there's only 6 characters in it, let's say, it will store it as 6 characters, not 6 and 249 spaces after it. So it's fairly efficient in the way it does it. We can, however, define the maximum length of the string. There's the odd occasion where we might want to do that. We can also add a default to that, so we can add a default value. And just bear in mind we're in the advanced here, so at this point in basic you wouldn't be able to say any more options, but I'm going to work in advanced. We have the opportunity here now to just define it must be unique. So it would do a similar idea to what the validate step does within a workflow action. And we can define whether it allows a null value or not into that field. Now the password. So we add our password field. Again, it's going to be a string. I'm not going to set any of those, other than you probably shouldn't have a null password, so we'll take out allow null. And then lastly, I'm going to create a role field. So role string, we'll make that say a maximum of 1 character, because we're going to just store a single character. We're going to give it a default value of u and for user, and we're not going to allow nulls in there at all. So there's our table that we've defined within our development context, because we always work in development and then replicate to production. So I'm now going to just go to apply database changes. I'm going to call it add user table. OK. And there we are. See, those database changes have been applied. If ever you do that and you don't get an error message, or you get a confirmation that it's done, but the table doesn't appear here, it used to happen quite a lot in the past. I haven't noticed so much lately, but always remember you have the option to refresh the full database schema, and you also have the ability to refresh that table schema as well. So if for some bizarre reason it doesn't show up, don't try and redo it, because that'll lead you into problems. Always just do a refresh and just make sure that it isn't just a refresh issue that is involved there. So we create our users table. We need to replicate that now to our production environment. How do we do that? Well, you see that change now has been added to the changes. It's showing as a tick because that's been applied to this particular target, in other words the development target. If I go into my production target, so we've got our add user table option. I'm just going to now apply that and see we can apply latest change, this change. We can actually roll back changes as well. I'm just going to apply this change. There we are, second or two, and now we see that that table has been added to our production database. Now that's not the only way you can make the apply. Remember, within the publish we also have the ability to apply database changes there. So if you don't apply them at this stage, when you do a publish of your site, you optionally can say, well, apply those database changes at the same time, please. Personally, I like to do it within the database manager because I like to see it happening, and I tend to do it in small amounts. I don't make lots and lots of changes and commit them all in one. I tend to add a table, commit, add a table, commit, etc. Just so I feel more in control of it in that way. But that's just me being me. So that's created our first table. We'll now be moving on to looking at how we're going to make relations between tables, etc. I don't think I actually showed you the full list of the... Sorry. You'll see things are grayed out here because I'm still in production. Wappler does not allow you to make changes within the production environment. I'll explain about caveat there in a moment. We can see that we've gone back in. We set that to a string, but we've got a number of different field types that we could have added. String and text, what's the difference? String is basically a varchar, 255 characters maximum. Text is the equivalent of, I suppose, a MySQL text field. It holds huge amounts. I can't remember off the top of my head. Pages and pages and pages of information. Boolean, I mean, as you probably know, MySQL doesn't actually have a Boolean field type. Wappler looks after that. It translates that. It uses 0 and 1 as an alternative. And we've got date, time, timestamp. We can have binary fields, JSON fields. We can specifically add a big int field, floating point, and we actually have a specific UUID field as well, of course. So we're protected from the complexities of defining these databases because Wappler itself has effectively categorized. You'll notice, we've only got decimal and float, for instance. We don't have all the other different options that would be available. And that's actually comes from Connex. All of these things are part of the Connex framework, and Connex manages those translations that are required between different database types to maintain your continuity that you would need. So let's just create another file now. I think that's probably the time to do it. In development, I'm going to create another table now. I'm going to create, let's say, address, because we want to know where the addresses are of the individuals. Now, we could create this as a subtable. In fact, I probably would in reality, but I'm not dealing with subtables in this particular video. That's in the following video about subtables and multi-references. So we got address, ID. I'm just put it all into one text field, address, and now, of course, I want to make a reference from users as a primary key to the addresses within the addresses table. So references or relations are set within the Wappler Database Manager by using a field called a reference field. So what we need to do is to set up a reference between our addresses and our users. And that's really simple to do. All we do is we create a new field, we give it a name. In this case, I'm just going to stick with the name of what it refers to. Sorry, got new teeth. And we change that to a reference field. What we do is we're telling it that field there is actually a reference to the users table, and it's a reference to the field user ID. We can also set our actions. So in this case, I want the update to cascade and the delete to restrict, just to ensure we maintain data integrity. So that's really all it takes to create a relationship within the Wappler Database Manager. So all it needs now is for me to commit that change. See, that's been committed now. We see we have our fields there. I'm now going to switch into my production target, and I'm going to commit that change to my production target. There we are. We can now see that a reference field has been created linking to our users table. So that really is all it takes to create a relationship. Obviously there's much more complex relationships available within the Wappler Database Manager now, because we have our subtables, we have our multi-references, but as I say, they are subject of a future video or another video which is already actually available to you. So that's how we deal with our references. So I think now is probably a good time to have a look at database templates. So what are database templates? I would describe them as a really fabulous feature. It allows us to save a standard template of a database and replicate that into any new sites that we have with it, literally a couple of clicks of a button. How many times have you created a user table? Well, the answer is probably virtually every site that you do. Wouldn't it be great to be able to auto-create them when you create a new project, or near enough auto-create them? Well, all you need to do is click on your table, and you can do this with multiple tables as well. I'll just do one table, and let's go into create a new template. Give it a description. So standard users table. You can choose to save the data that's in there as well. With the save data option, you can clear, if there's already a table in there with the same name, you can choose to clear the existing table before adding this. And you can also even force it to use the same record ID. So if for any reason you hard-coded a record ID, not a good idea, but sometimes it has to be done, then you have the choice to replicate those IDs as well. And then we just click create. Our database template has been created successfully. Now it's going to pop into another one of the millions of projects we've got here. This is just a test environment. You already have a user, so I'm just going to delete that. So say I want to add the users table to this particular environment. I literally just have to go to apply database templates, standard users template that I created, and there we are. We have that users template, and if I look at the data, happened to be none in there as it turned out, but that would also have the data in there as well. So that is a really useful feature, and it's a really big time saver. So probably now what we need to do is to have a look at what to do when things go horribly wrong, and they do, let's face it. So let's have a look at some of the features available within the Database Manager to be able to correct mistakes, whether there be a change of mind in what you wanted to do, or maybe something's gone horribly wrong and you need to fix it. What we've got to remember first, for starters, is when we have these changes, we have the ability to be able to roll those changes back. So if I roll back, let's say, the add address and reference option, I'm going to just start that in production. I'm going to roll it back in production. Take a couple of seconds. Okay, we've rolled that back. Notice that hasn't been refreshed, so let's just refresh that schema just to keep everything in sync. It's important that you keep an eye on these things, because sometimes the schema doesn't get refreshed for whatever reason. I'm going to do the same in the development environment as well, of course. And again, maybe this is actually something that the team have missed. If you revert, it doesn't get refreshed. And you have the option then to reapply them if you want. So you can apply that change and you'll see that's back, and we can do exactly the same in our production environment. We can reapply that change. And there we are, we see that that's been reapplied. So that's a fairly basic level. If you go to try and delete a change which has been applied, you will get a message saying you're not allowed to delete that. So if you've gotten a mess and you're trying to get rid of some of these changes to consolidate things, then you can't do that. What you can do though is unlock the changes history, and then from there you are actually able to delete even if they've been committed. Not something you should be doing lightly. We also have the option to completely reset changes. What does that do? Well, I'll just show you. If you reset changes, it actually changes everything back to not being committed. Now that's a problem now, because this is where you would need to be able to delete them, because obviously if you reapply them you're going to get a error. So what you'd actually have to do is delete these tables first and then reapply those changes. What else can we do? We've got the rollbacks. That's probably about all that we can do in relation to changing things. So in this case, if I'd gotten a real mess, I could then just delete these changes, delete again, and then we've got that data is correct, but of course we've lost the ability to roll back now because we've deleted those entries. And also if we go into our production, see, we'll get an error here. That's because we've deleted those. We've got everything out of sync. So you would have to reset that changes history in there as well. And now everything should be cleaned up. You can continue to work with your tables. However, you've lost that history because of those mistakes you made. Now, one of the places where you can get really out of sync if you are working with Git is that if I was to revert through Git back to a previous event, perhaps one where say the address table didn't exist, that wouldn't roll back your production. So what you could end up with a situation is where your production say has a table but your development doesn't. I'm just going to try that. Hopefully that will work okay. I'm going to revert to there. Now if I go back into my database manager, we will have to refresh the schema there. Absolutely necessary. It appears I'd actually I've committed that address table before there. But just have to talk you through that. What you would have now is a situation where potentially that address table has gone because we reverted back to a checkpoint before then. But of course your production table, it would still be there. And you can't delete anything in production. It doesn't allow you because it is it stops you changing anything within a production environment. And there's a way around that. It's not recommended to be done, but sometimes it has to be, is if you go into your targets, into your production, and I'm actually working in this, but it would be obviously set to production. If you set that to development and save that, it will then allow you to make changes within the production environment, and I'm not going to do it because I'll get everything out of sync, but you could then actually delete that table. So that's a way of allowing you to be able to remove tables from your production environment when things have got out of sync. And the example will be maybe where you do a git revert, and you revert your development environment to a different setup to your production. I think that probably covers everything that we've got regarding reverting and changing and resetting changes and being able to revert that. So let's move on. So let's take a look at the data management facilities within the database manager, because you have a fairly limited, albeit very useful, ability to be able to manage data in your database tables. So just for example, here we see I've got the users table, and I can go down and I can look at view, edit data. There's fetch data button up here, so that will fetch the latest copy of data that you have there. But of course we don't have any data at all in our system at the moment. What I can do is I can go add new. We can add our data in there. I'll just put gibberish in for the password. Let's say the user role is user, and we can save that. We get the option to be able to keep those changes to be applied later as database changes. Not going to do that, and then we'll just add a entry for George as well. More gibberish, and we'll put him down as administrator. Let's save that, and there we are. We have our data. I'll just do a refetch just to show that's saved, and of course we have the ability to be able to delete data out of there as well. So we have this fairly limited thing. We can see the number of records that we're viewing up here, all 100,000. You can also put filters in to limit to certain fields if you wish. We can also show and hide columns from here. So it's very, very useful facility. It's it's not Navicat, but it's really useful. And of course we can as well come in and just edit these things and say we want to Brian's. We can then, it'll automatically detect the change and we can save it. I'm not going to do that. Okay, so that's your basic management facilities, and I think we need to move on probably to seeds next. Okay, let's finally look at seeds. Seeds really to a large degree have been overshadowed by our database templates that are available now. Seeds have been an option that's been there pretty well from day one, long before database templates were introduced, if I remember rightly, October 2023. But as that function is there, then it's important that you understand what it's all about. So basically, if we take a table, and I'm just going to show you the data in here. I have added a little bit of test data. We can take a snapshot of that data and keep it as a seed, so that if ever we need to restore that data back into our system, we can do that. So if we go into our users table and say create a seed, you'll see it's a slightly less sophisticated input than the templates. We'll get it, we'll call it snapshot of users. We don't want to clear, we can choose to clear the previous data that was in there when we restore that seed, and we can even restore the original IDs should we need to. So just create that, and we see now we've got snapshot of users. If I now go into the users table, and I'm just going to delete those entries out. I'll just show you fetch data. They have definitely gone. But what I can do is go to our seed and apply that seed. Now, if I refresh the data, you will see that data has been restored. And just noticed I'm doing that in production environment. Where it's useful in its main is that if you have a data set in your development environment that you want to replicate through to production, then you can indeed create your seed from your development environment and then apply that seed through to your production. So that's a handy way of getting not just the data structures but the data itself from one target to another. Because remember, when we're making these database changes within the database manager, we're changing structures, we're not moving data about. All we're doing is managing the structure of the database. So I think at that point I've probably exhausted everything that I can tell you about the database manager. And I thank you for listening to this quite long presentation, but I hope that's clarified for you how to use the database manager, how powerful it is, what great features it's got, and hopefully how to be able to get things back on the rails if things go horribly wrong. So thank you for joining me.